So I hope everyone's had a good evening, and welcome to our our first digital glaucoma support group of 2022. I hope you've all had a wonderful start to the year. And thank you all so much for joining. We've got lots of you here tonight, I think. Sorry, bear with me, I'm just doing my Facebook. We've got loads of you here this evening because we are aware that lots of you have requested a talk on normal tension glaucoma. So it's really nice to see that interest in normal tension glaucoma has been converted to lots of you here. So I can see we've got one of the biggest audiences ever. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm Joanna Bradley, Head of Support Services at Glaucoma UK. And our speaker this evening is Professor Gus Gazzard, Consultant Ophthalmologist and Head of the Glaucoma Service at Moorfields Eye Hospital. He's going to be talking to us about normal tension glaucoma, so what it is and how it might be managed, and what being diagnosed with it might mean for you. I'm so glad so many of you have chosen to spend your evening with us, and I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about the format of today's talk and the technical side of Zoom. So just to go through some of the technicals about how this Zoom group will work. We can't see or hear audience members, but you should be able to see and hear me and Gus. We're also being streamed live on Facebook, and if you're watching there, you can ask questions by commenting on the feed. There'll be 2 short polls launched during this webinar as well. These are to help us see the difference that the sessions are having and if you feel you're learning things. I'm going to launch the first one now, and this will stay open for a minute or so. If you're having any technical difficulties at any point, just try turning off other devices that are connected to the Wi-Fi, or leave the session and rejoin using the same link. If you'd like to ask a question at any point, please wiggle your mouse or touch your screen and you'll see the Q&A box appear on your screen. Click on this. If you have any questions for Gus, type them here. You can ask your questions whenever you want, but we'll answer them all at the end of the session. Even if you don't have any questions, keep an eye on that Q&A panel, and if you like a particular question, you can click on the thumbs up button, and the most popular questions will come to the top of the list, and we will try to answer those first. The chat button is best used if you're having technical issues, so try to keep your questions about normal tension glaucoma in the Q&A. It just makes it a bit easier for us to keep track of all the questions and keep them all in one place. We do really want this session to be interactive and cover the topics you're most interested in. So please do ask any sessions, and the only silly question is one you wanted to ask but didn't. I have activated closed captioning for this talk. If you want to switch them on or off, click on the button marked CC or live transcript. This is automatic subtitling, which finds some medical words hard. So I've seen trabeculectomy turned into Rebecca said to me, and slightly unfortunately, 1 or 2 talks ago, we had glaucoma somehow turned into diarrhea, which was a bit unfortunate. So a little bit about Glaucoma UK. We are the UK's only charity for people with glaucoma. We work in 3 main areas to prevent glaucoma sight loss. Firstly, we campaign to raise awareness of the disease. We want people to know what glaucoma is and about the importance of getting your eyes tested. The earlier glaucoma is diagnosed, the less likely people are to experience sight loss. Secondly, we provide support and advice to people with glaucoma and those who care for them. We have information leaflets, a helpline, a buddy service, and a patient forum, and we provide training and advice to professionals looking after people with glaucoma. All of our services are free. Finally, we fund research into the diagnosis, treatment, care, and prevention of glaucoma. So I'm going to hand over now to our speaker, Gus. So please don't forget to post any questions you have in the Q&A. So Gus, over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Is that sharing okay?
Yes, that looks great.
Brilliant. Okay. So I don't have hundreds of slides, you'll be pleased to hear. And I put together, very quickly put together lots and lots of slides. And then I went through with a critical eye, cutting out all the ones that, if you'll excuse the expression, my mum wouldn't understand. And then I thought about how we would structure this. Now I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have questions. But also I'm going to try and, on the way through, answer some of the questions you may have. So bear with me and see what comes up. There's a huge amount that we can talk about with normal pressure glaucoma. Joanna's, I think, has promised to shut me up at 20 minutes if I get carried away. Because I can talk for hours, and particularly about glaucoma. So normal pressure glaucoma. First bit of every slide of every talk should be, you know, who I am and where I've come from. Jana's described me. My academic side of things is a randomized controlled trialist. So I run trials of treatments for glaucoma. I did one of laser SLT as a primary treatment, i.e. the first thing that people got, compared to eye drops as the first thing that they got, which has taken up many years of the last decade. But I also run trials of surgery. I've run trials of how to do laser. We're recruitment centers for lots of other trials from around the world. I'm running we recently ran a trial in Tanzania, or I collaborated on that. And then we're also running a trial in China. So lots of focus on treatment. And we're about to start running another trial on nicotinamide, vitamin B3, as a tablet treatment, which, if it works, will be the first non-pressure lowering treatment. So lots of excitement around therapies, but there's lots of other decisions and facts to get one's head around before you get to that stage. And I'm going to try and touch on some of those as well. The second slide of every talk should be funding acknowledgements, where I partly acknowledge who has paid for me to have such fun running trials. And that's mainly the National Institute of Health Research, which is your taxpayers' money via the NHS, the health technology assessment part of that mainly. But then also a number of other institutions, UCL, the Biomedical Research Centre, some charity funding from the Friends of Moorfields, amongst others, and including what was then the IGA, Glaucoma UK, via the College of Ophthalmologists for one of my students. Now, first question I think we need to think about is what is normal tension glaucoma, or let's say what is glaucoma, and what are the terms that we all use. And often as doctors we use them interchangeably, sometimes without realizing or even thinking about it. Those of you who are awake will have noticed that my title was normal pressure glaucoma, and I've just called it normal tension glaucoma, tension just meaning pressure in this context. So glaucoma, as many of you will know, but some may not, is a slowly progressive loss of individual nerve fibers from the optic nerve at a rate that's faster than normal age-related loss. So unfortunately, all of us in our various rooms and homes are losing retinal ganglion cells simply through age. And if you have glaucoma, those individual nerve fibers that take information from the eyeball back to the seeing part of the brain via a few little junctions, those individual nerve fibers, for a variety of reasons, are unhappy and sick, and some of them will stop working, sometimes temporarily. You can sometimes rescue them, but sometimes permanently, then they die. And when that happens, it gets called glaucoma, and you end up with a characteristic pattern of damage where these individual nerve fibers, which are running with these blood vessels on the surface of the retina on this picture, and then they reach the optic nerve head, or the optic disc, because it simply looks like a disc. And then they're all bundled together in the outside bit of this, where it's looking pinky orange. And then they take a right angle and they head back into the brain, which is several blocks into your, beyond you, into your screen, several streets over. If those nerve fibers are dying, this big gap in the middle, which is called the cup, which is why doctors sometimes talk about cupping or cup disc ratios, is where there's space and those nerve fibers are missing. And then down the bottom here, you can see that there is, instead of this nice pink rim, there is a a complete absence of that pink rim where those previously bundled together nerve fibers have completely disappeared. Now you can lose nerve fibers without losing vision, and you can lose nerve fibers and lose some vision without realizing it, as you may be aware, and that's the nature of glaucoma of all sorts generally. So how does low pressure normal tension glaucoma differ from that? And that's what we're going to come on for the next 10 to 15 minutes. So firstly, this is something that came from a charity that should know better. It was actually in Australia. I'll spare their blushes, describing what glaucoma looked like. And any of you who have advanced glaucoma will know that the patients that I talk to do not describe big chunks of black in the periphery of their vision. What they describe is it not working properly. And so I don't like this description of glaucoma. It's much closer to something like this, and some of you may have seen Anne Hurst from Belgium's pictures before, and there's such a lovely representation of what patients tell us they're seeing. This is a scene of her children running into a street after their ball with someone with no glaucoma and normal vision. This is the visual field bottom left that we're doing in our clinics, and showing the impact that that then has on what they are able to see. And most of what's seen bottom right has disappeared. If it gets worse and the visual field is more severely affected, more of the vision is missing, more of the scene is gone, and as a result, those children become completely invisible. Now, what's important about these pictures is that you can see that the missing bits have been filled in by what's around them. So you can often have very advanced disease without realizing it and have lost a lot of those individual nerve fibers without knowing what's going on. Now, how does low pressure glaucoma or normal pressure glaucoma or normal tension glaucoma, all of which are synonym, all of which are the same terms for the same thing, differ from regular open angle glaucoma, which is the common garden usual sort of glaucoma in most of our clinics? And really, the primary difference is the clues in the name, which is that when the pressures are checked, the pressures are always in the normal range. Now, pressure measurements vary. If you have pressure measurements done throughout the day, they will vary. If different people do them, they may vary a bit, because it's quite subjective deciding whether the little semicircles of fluorescent yellow dye that we see through our prism, as you can see in the top picture, is sometimes a little bit variable as to how thick those are allowed to be, how close they have to be. So there's a bit of variability in the measurement. There's also variability in the eye. So saying the pressure is in a normal range is what we usually mean is pressures are always in the normal range, and they've never been caught to be raised at any stage with a reliable test that we believe. Now, in other aspects, in terms of nerve damage, visual field loss, such as those tests that I've just shown you, where the black areas were vision that was less sensitive than it ought to be, an optic nerve damage where I described the cut when we were looking at it from the front. This is the same sort of idea from a microscope view of a nerve that's been cut in cross section, showing that in the middle, in the gap there, there is space, and the individual nerve fibers are coming over the surface of the retina and then taking a right angle and then heading back down into the bottom of the screen. In most characteristics, most low pressure, normal pressure glaucoma is roughly the same as open angled, common garden open angle glaucoma. There are long debates as to whether there are subtle differences or some differences in some people, but a lot of those apparent differences are probably not real. And it probably doesn't matter. So how does it differ other than having normal pressure? Well, if you have normal pressure, a lot of people come to me and say, well, I thought that glaucoma was all about pressure. Well, glaucoma treatment, at least at the moment, is all about pressure. But glaucoma and having the disease arises because, remember, those individual nerve fibers are unwell, they're sick, and then they die. They are like that because of one of maybe 100 individual different factors. And the genetics of the individual, so having a family history is relevant because it can run in families, doesn't always by any means, but it can do. But your genetic makeup will influence the whole host of factors within the eye that affect the health of those individual nerve fibers. So the way I try to describe it to people is to say, well, those individual nerves are more or less healthy for a variety of reasons. And those reasons include the pressure inside the eye, but also how well the little energy factories within the nerve called mitochondria, how well they work. And that is generally speaking an age and genetics related fact. But also how much blood supply they're getting, what their how flexible the blood vessels are within the optic nerve, how stiff the supporting pieces of collagen within the optic nerve are, how large the optic nerve is, how floppy the supports around the optic nerve are. And there are hundreds of research studies and PhDs, literally hundreds, that have been done trying to tease out the various different risk factors that might apply to making an optic nerve, or those individual nerve fibers more accurately, happy or sad, healthy or sick. Pressure is only one of them, and all of those different factors also, to make life really complicated, interact with each other. So low pressure glaucoma, and the term I generally use in my letters is low pressure primary open angle glaucoma, to make it absolutely clear that I think it's the same disease, the same illness, it's just a low pressure version of it. Low pressure primary open angle glaucoma differs from so-called normal or high pressure or high tension glaucoma in that that particular person has got slightly more of all those other risk factors making their nerves unhappy, other than just the pressure. So if you give me a pressure of 50, because I get hit in the eye by a squash ball, then some of my nerve fibers, the retinal ganglion cells, and retinal with their long fibers, their axons going back into the brain, some of my retinal ganglion cells will die quite quickly from a pressure of 50, and that's true of whoever you are. How quickly they die depends on the particular individual and all those other factors that I've just described to you: the shape of the eye, the shape of the nerve, the shape of the optic disc, the stiffness of proteins and such like. So what you've got is a whole load of different risk factors, characteristics, if you like, that all come into play on that one individual nerve, trying to decide how happy or not it is. So pressures in the normal range. The normal varies between races. It varies between some studies, but generally speaking, it's considered to be an average of around about 15, and 95% of normal people will have pressures that are between 9 and 21. That is not a magic number, and if you're 22, you're not abnormal, you're just slightly higher than the average. Corneal thickness can affect those measurements. So if the cornea, which is the clear window at the front of your eye, is thinner than average, then any of the pressure measurements that we take will be a slight underestimate, because it's easier to push in the thin skin of a balloon, if you like, than it is to push in the thick wall of, so let's think of a tennis ball, say. So if that outer coat of the ball that you're pushing to see what the pressure is very thin, you'll be able to push it in more easily, regardless of the pressure on the other side. So it affects the measurement. And then vice versa, if it's very thick, it will slightly overread. Other factors, as I've described, are also responsible for nerve damage, but all of those other factors are, at least at the moment, things that we can't change. So most of those things, not all, but most of those things, I think are factors that it's hard for us to do something about. But that explains why some nerves are very delicate and get damaged with pressures of 15, and some nerves are really strong and robust and will not get damaged at all with pressures of 25. The visual field tests may be slightly different. It is often stated in textbooks that the visual field results have a different characteristic, different pattern. If you're the individual who's affected, that probably doesn't really matter, because your eyes are your eyes and they'll do what they will regardless of what the average is. Some of the reason that visual fields seem to be different is something very technical called ascertainment bias, but it means that people with low pressure glaucoma don't get caught as often by their optometrist's pressure check, because their pressures are normal. And unless the optometrist or optician on the high street is looking very carefully or testing their visual field, then they are often missed. In the a large population-based prevalence survey in Norfolk called Epic Norfolk, they found that almost half of all the people with glaucoma who were undetected. Sorry, almost half of people with glaucoma were undetected, even in Norfolk where there are lots of optometrists to go to. But almost all of those had normal or low pressure because it gets missed. The people who get picked up are often the ones that have got central visual field loss, which is probably the reason why people say visual fields are different. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Other conditions are sometimes seen more often in that particular in this particular condition. So you will frequently read that MPG or NTG is related to migraine, and people who have migraine or low blood pressure or a particular characteristic pattern of changes in the blood vessels in the fingers called Raynaud's syndrome. All of those things are true, but it doesn't necessarily, all those things are associated with low pressure glaucoma, but it doesn't really change the diagnosis, because lots of people who have those conditions don't have glaucoma, and lots of people who have low pressure glaucoma don't have those conditions. So although it's interesting for the science of it, it doesn't make that much difference to a particular individual. And treating your Raynaud's with calcium channel blockers or whatever, or treating your migraines won't have any impact, as far as we're aware, on the glaucoma. Very, very important is that not all eyes get worse even without treatment. So if you take a group of people that you think has low pressure glaucoma and you monitor them over 5 years, a significant proportion will seem to have glaucoma at the beginning, but then won't change, or they'll change so slowly you can't tell. So this is true for all glaucoma. It is probably more true for normal pressure glaucoma. Now, how do we treat low pressure primary open angle glaucoma? Does the treatment differ from normal, so-called normal POAG, sometimes called chronic open angle glaucoma, after the NICE guidance, last NICE guidance but one coined the term? It's not a term I particularly like, but I'm happy to use it alongside POAG. Well, generally the principles are the same. They're exactly the same. It is fundamentally the same disease, but there are a few little wrinkles. We set a target pressure to try and reach it. So all the treatments are about lowering pressure. None of the other treatments have any evidence behind them at this stage, although some people do try them. We set a target pressure based on, and we aim to reach that pressure, and then we monitor to see if we got it right. How do we set that target? Well, we do that on the basis of the pressure at which we think the eye was being damaged. So if somebody turns up to a clinic and their pressure is 40, we know that 40 was damaging their nerve. So if we get them down to 20, that might well be enough for that person. If somebody walks into the same clinic and they've got the same amount of damage, but their pressure is 20, clearly leaving them at 20 is going to achieve nothing at all, and getting them down to 18 is going to achieve very little. We probably need to get them down to the low teens or even 10. So different targets will be set depending on where the patient started, and also if you have more advanced disease, or if you are younger, because we have to keep that nerve healthy for 50 years instead of 20, then we may set even lower targets. We need to rule out non-glaucoma conditions. So this is where there is a difference in how we approach low pressure primary open angle glaucoma. If somebody walks into this same clinic with a pressure of 40 and characteristic patterns of nerve damage and visual field loss, and their angles are open, so it's not angle closure, it's pretty likely to be glaucoma because their pressure's 40. If somebody walks in with some visual field loss, but their pressure is 18, they may well have glaucoma, but we have to be that much more alert to the fact that they might have something else going on. And that is why in the old days, some people used to say wrongly that everyone needed a head scan. Now, there are some conditions which can look like low pressure open angle glaucoma, and we need to rule those out by looking for clues. And Sherlock Holmes, like, we need to look very carefully for subtle things that might suggest to us that something's not quite right. And we always have to bear in mind that some people with glaucoma will also have something else going on. By something else, I mean a blood vessel or something sitting behind the eye that can squash the nerve, or inflammation inside the nerve, or old blockages to arteries in the nerve that can function like a small stroke or something similar. There's a long list of things that can look like low pressure primary open angle glaucoma, and some of those clues are changes to color vision, patterns of visual field loss, being symptomatic, knowing that something's going wrong rather than being asymptomatic, not knowing something's going on. There are lots of clues that we look out for in our clinics on a daily basis. And in fact, only yesterday, I've ordered an MRI brain scan for somebody because what they described to me did not fit with their visual field. They were symptomatic, they were aware of something being wrong, and in fact they have low pressure, normal pressure. So I'm trying to exclude other causes of a nerve problem for them. Now, in normal pressure glaucoma, the damaging pressure is lower, so the treated pressure needs to be even lower still. So we need to go from something in the normal range to something even lower. Drops are able to do that. Laser, if they're in the higher group, if they're at the higher end of the normal pressure, is still sometimes able to do that. But occasionally we can't get pressures low enough with laser or drops, and that's when surgery comes into play. It is possible to lower pressure too much, so therefore the range between where we're trying to get and where we don't want to get, because the pressure, if it's too low, will damage the eye, is quite narrow, and the targets are harder to hit. So I have carried out glaucoma surgery called trabeculectomy on patients with pressures as low as 10, which normally we would consider a great success for our surgery. And actually, but unfortunately, in that particular lady, her measured pressures were 10. Her real pressures may have been a little bit higher because she had thin corneas. But her measured pressures of 10 were causing her progressive damage, and so we took the difficult decision to try and get it even lower with surgery. We were lucky, she was lucky, that we managed to do that without causing harm and without too much fuss. But that's a rarity, that's uncommon, but sometimes it's necessary to do that. So what is the treatment? Well, pressure lowering, SLT laser, drops, and surgery are the same treatments for all. For most glaucoma, and certainly for all open angle glaucoma. You have to be a little bit careful with which drops you use. Beta blockers have some side effects that are particularly relevant for low pressure open angle glaucoma. Timolol, which is a beta blocker, can lower your blood pressure, which may be a bad thing, and therefore I rarely use timolol at night, and I never use it at night in low pressure open angle glaucoma because it lowers the heart rate, lowers the blood pressure, and may harm the nerve more than eye pressure lowering is worth. Other factors can help. Very boring standard doctor's advice, I'm afraid, which is exercise, don't smoke, and have a healthy high veg, particularly green leafy vegetables diet. So all of those things that, in fact, my grandmother said have got a lot of evidence behind them now, not just that they will, including exercise, not just that all three of these will reduce your risks of heart attacks, diabetes, high blood pressure, stroke, etc. It will also reduce your risk of dementia, but it will also help your glaucoma. And exercise doesn't need to be an exercise bike, a rowing machine, or a half a marathon. You can just make sure that you walk to the bus stop in once a day, go out for a brisk walk, or get off the bus earlier and walk a little bit further to home, or something just to get the heart rate just a little bit up. Even gardening is better than watching another episode of All Creatures Great and Small. So exercise, don't smoke, and a high healthy high veg diet. Very boring doctory kind of nagging advice, but something that does make a difference, and probably makes a more important difference in low pressure open angle glaucoma. Dietary supplements are debated widely. There are supplements that some people use. Ginkgo biloba is popular because it's thought to improve blood supply. I personally don't recommend it because I'm very worried about some of its secondary effects. As a blood thinner, I'm worried that if even one person in my career has a bigger stroke than they might have done because I put them on ginkgo, that could wipe out an awful lot of its benefit over the course of my career. So I personally don't recommend that. Some of my colleagues at Moorfields do so, and that's a very personal thing. I do recommend vitamin B3 because although we don't have the result of our 600 patient £2 million trial for another 5 years, I think there is enough evidence to support it, and I certainly would take it if I had glaucoma. So vitamin B3, nicotinamide at very high doses, if you can tolerate it, is something that I recommend, particularly to my low pressure open angle glaucoma patients. Ginkgo I'm a little bit more skeptical about, and the other things out there, blueberries, bilberry juice, etc. May not do any harm, but there's no evidence at all that they do any good. And some of these things can be quite expensive. So don't skimp on your healthy diet in order to have these tablets.
Our next talk is in a couple of weeks' time on the 26th of January. It's with a glaucoma patient and our helpline manager, talking through how to live well with glaucoma. I think it's all about how you can feel empowered to manage your glaucoma well. And then we have lots of other talks coming up between now and Easter. So how pharmacists can help with eye drops, everything you ever wanted to know about glaucoma. That's a kind of introductory session. Bits about glaucoma surgeries. There were quite a lot of questions today about surgeries, so do feel free to attend that one in a few weeks' time. And glaucoma and genetics. So we've got loads of talks coming up, hopefully of interest to lots of you. There's information on the website about all of them, or you can call the helpline and they can direct you to a bit more information. So thank you so much, Gus, for that really very, very helpful and informative talk. When this webinar ends, you will a sort of survey will launch, and if you could please consider completing that, we would be very grateful. We really do look at your feedback very carefully and use it to plan our sessions and improve our sessions. So the more feedback we receive, the better these sessions will be. I'm sure lots of you have already, but if you haven't, please sign up to our Focus newsletter, which comes every month. I know our upcoming one has some information about a survey that's coming up for volunteers and our AGM and things. So please do consider signing up to Focus, and you can hear lots more about Glaucoma UK. So on that, we've 1 minute overdue. So thank you so much, Gus. That was really interesting and helpful, and you've answered a lot of people's questions. So really appreciate it. And thank you all to our lovely audience, and hopefully see lots of you in future talks. Thank you. Bye.